As Israel Apartheid Week is coming, we know that one issue that's going to be at the forefront is the issue of what happened in Gaza a couple of months ago. While the fighting in Gaza has ended, the battle over what actually happened there still rages on college campuses. All kinds of misinformation, lies are thrown out there trying to paint Israel's actions in a terrible, horrific light. Since, for sure, those of us who are going to be out there on the front lines trying to deal with Israel Apartheid Week are going to hear all kinds of claims and misconceptions about what happened in Gaza, I want to spend a few minutes dealing with some of those misconceptions and offering a few facts that are important to know. The first thing we have to be able to explain to people is to give them context. Why did this happen in Gaza in the first place? Why is Israel and the Palestinians even fighting over Gaza? What's going on there? We all know that in 1967, when Israel was attacked in the Six-Day War, by the end of that war, Israel found itself in control of Gaza and the Sinai Desert. After a number of years later, when Israel made peace with Egypt, they gave them back the Sinai Desert, but kept Gaza because the Egyptians did not want Gaza for various reasons. Between that time and until the early 90s, Israel had military control over Gaza, but it was always their plan to make peace with the Palestinians and to eventually give them their own autonomy. This culminated in the early 1990s in the Oslo Accords, when the Israelis and the Palestinians sat down to try to make a peace deal. Israel put on the table at that point, as long as peace, real peace could be made, Israel was willing to give to the Palestinians 100% of Gaza. By the year 2000, when the Camp David negotiations happened between, at that time, Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak and Yasser Arafat, the head of the Palestinians, hosted by President Clinton, Israel offered the Palestinians a very solid offer of 100% of the Gaza Strip. The Palestinians completely rejected it. We fast forward to 2005. At this point in 2005, Israel decided, even though they couldn't make a peace deal with the Palestinians, they were still going to completely disengage from Gaza. Israel decided to pull out not only all of its military presence from the Gaza Strip, but 8,000 civilians who had made a home in Jewish communities in Gaza. Called the disengagement, Israel pulled out 100% of its presence in the Gaza Strip. Many Israelis figured, well, now Israel's gone from Gaza. Now there won't be any problems between Israelis and Palestinians living in Gaza. There will be no more claims that Israel's occupying. There will be no more reason for conflict. But instead of getting peace, Israel got rockets. Thousands of rockets came flying out of Gaza into the Israeli cities and communities bordering Gaza. So many rockets that literally citizens living in cities like Sderot and kibbutzim in Israel proper along Gaza lived in constant fear. They never knew when a rocket was going to fall. Schools for children were hit by rockets. They had to move schools into bomb shelters. People who would sleep at night would wake up in the middle of the night at any sound because they didn't know when a rocket was going to fall. When an alarm would go off in these cities saying that a rocket was coming, a person has 15 seconds to find shelter. Millions of Israelis lived in constant fear of rockets falling. People were killed, people were injured, tons of property damage, and this is how Israel lived for 3 years, trying to end this rocket barrage, but never really doing anything forcefully. Finally, at the end of 2008, Israelis had enough. Israelis in unison were telling their government, we need to be defended, we need to be protected, and Israel finally decided to go into Gaza to stop the rockets going into Israel. They decided to go after Hamas, the terrorist organization, named a terrorist organization by the United Nations, by European countries, to go after them, to get them to stop firing rockets into Israel proper. That was the goal of why Israel went in. That was the purpose of why they went in. They did not go in to take land from the Palestinians. They did not go to attack innocent Palestinians. They went for a very specific sole purpose, to stop the rockets going into Israel. Many people say, oh, Israel was going in because they wanted to reoccupy Gaza. But as soon as Israel had decided that they had maybe not completely stopped the rockets, but seriously impeded the Palestinians, the Hamas, from shooting the rockets, Israel left. Israel did not stay there. Israel has no interest in going back into Gaza. They went in there to stop the rockets, which in the thousands have been shot into Israel. Now, many people say that, Israel broke the ceasefire, that there was a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel broke it by going in and attacking Gaza. This is completely ludicrous. The thousands of rockets that have been shot into Israel for the last few years, not to mention during the very specific 6 months of when there was a truce, still over 300 rockets during the time of the truce, during the time of the ceasefire, came out of Gaza into Israel proper. When Israel finally decided to defend themselves, they didn't break a ceasefire. The ceasefire was broken when the first rocket was shot out, let alone the 100th, the 200th, the 300th. That Hamas decided to break the ceasefire. They never adhered to the ceasefire, and Israel was only defending themselves. Now, many people claim that Israel was using disproportionate force when it went in to try to stop the rockets. It's also a very strange point to make. What is proportionate force? Should Israel have shot 5,000 rockets into civilian territories in Gaza like Hamas did to Israel? Would that have been proportionate? Israel was going in to try to defend its citizens. It had to go in to stop the rockets. It only targeted Hamas terrorists or their infrastructure and never targeted civilians. Now, unfortunately, many Palestinian civilians were injured and many even killed. But why was that? It wasn't because Israel was targeting them. It was because Hamas committed war crimes of hiding amongst civilians. They would shoot rockets into Israel from schools, from school grounds, from apartment buildings, from places where they knew they were amongst civilians. Why did they do that? Number one, they did that because they knew that Israel would think twice about attacking them if they were amongst civilians, because they knew that Israel has a moral code and they don't want to attack civilians. So number one, it was a way to defend themselves. But number two, they also knew that if Israel did attack them to try to stop them from shooting the rockets, that many Palestinian civilians would get injured or hurt or killed, and that would actually play to their advantage. In the world media and international opinion, people would say that Israel is using disproportionate force. So Hamas had so little regard for their own Palestinian people's life, they were willing to sacrifice them in order to get international world opinion. But Israel did everything it could to try to protect Palestinian civilians. Of course, Israel is not perfect. Of course, it made mistakes. Anytime a battle is fought, anytime a war is fought, mistakes happen. And regrettably, many innocent Palestinians were hurt or killed. But number one, as we said, Hamas instigated this war, and Israel has a right to defend itself. But Israel even went far out of its way to try to protect Palestinian civilians, dropping leaflets in areas that they were going to attack, letting civilians know that they should leave those areas. Yes, it would be terrible to get a leaflet and you have to leave your house, but at least your life wouldn't be in danger. At least you could go somewhere that you wouldn't be killed. Israel gave them that opportunity. Whether it was making phone calls into homes, letting people know that there was a terrorist in the building, and the next hour that terrorist was going to be killed and they should get out of the building. What army lets people know in a building before they're going to bomb the building because there's a terrorist there? Israel went tremendously out of its way in order to help civilians. So to say that Israel used disproportionate force is ridiculous. Israel went the other way. They tried to use tremendous restraint in order to protect Palestinian civilians. Many people say Israel was targeting women and children. That's completely absurd. Israel was targeting Hamas terrorists. At the end of the day, a lot of the numbers that are brought out about how many Palestinians were injured and killed all came from Palestinian sources, which many have been proven to be completely inaccurate. Israel has said that the vast majority, over 2/3 of the people that were killed or injured were men between the ages of 18 and 40, which means we're talking about people who were combatants, people who were terrorists, people who were involved in attacking Israel. Yes, many innocent people were hurt or killed, but it was because Hamas chose to fight amongst the people. Israel never targeted civilians, as opposed to Hamas. When they shoot rockets in Israel, they're specifically targeting civilians and not military people. Now, another big issue that we hear about when people talk about Gaza is the idea that there's a humanitarian crisis, that Israel has caused a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. And first of all, absolutely. Our heart goes out to those innocent Palestinians who've literally had to live in a war zone who I'm sure were at times it was difficult to get electricity, food, water, sanitation. It's a terrible thing. And any person who cares about human rights, obviously this should bother them. But again, the question is, who is the onus upon? Is it upon Israel for defending themselves? Is it upon Israel for trying to target terrorists who has shot thousands of rockets into their civilian population? Or is the onus upon Hamas, who first of all started this war by shooting so many rockets into Israel, but number two, stations themselves amongst civilians and causes all this hardship amongst the civilian population? In addition, Israel has tried to provide humanitarian aid to the Palestinians. Over the time when Israel went into Gaza, during the operation that Israel went in, over 15,000 trucks of aid was led into Gaza. Food, water, gasoline. Israel tried to the best that it could to provide humanitarian aid into Israel. Israel allowed Palestinians who were injured to come into Israel proper, to go to Israeli hospitals or trauma centers in order to get fixed. Again, what army anywhere in the world, when civilians and their enemy's population would allow those people to come to their hospitals in order to get medical treatment? But Israel did that because, see, Israel didn't see the Palestinian civilians as their enemy. Israel saw Hamas as not only the enemy of Israel, but Hamas as the enemy of the Palestinian civilians. So Israel was trying to protect the Palestinian civilians and give them medical aid as much as they could. Another big misconception or lie that was thrown around was that Israel was using illegal weapons when fighting against Hamas. Using white phosphorus was a claim that Human Rights Watch threw out, that Israel was illegally using white phosphorus, which can have a very deadly and painful, torturous effect in civilians. It can burn people and even burn down homes. Human Rights Watch put this out there as this claim that Israel was using this, but had no substantial evidence. They said that they decided that this is what Israel was using based on pictures of what was happening in Gaza and unsubstantiated witnesses. This claim was so unsubstantiated that within 72 hours after the claim, the Red Cross, the International Red Cross, which has not always proven to be a great friend of Israel, publicly came out saying that these claims of Israel using white phosphorus was completely unsubstantiated, and there was no proof at all that Israel was doing this. It proved to be just another lie that the Palestinians and their friends, Human Rights Watch, put out in order to defame Israel. Just a couple other misconceptions that were thrown out there. There was a claim or a misconception that Israel was targeting schools with children, because unfortunately there was one UN-run school that supposedly was bombed and 46 people were killed in it. Except later, within a week afterwards, when the fact came out, it was realized that the school was never bombed. In fact, Palestinians themselves admitted that the people who were injured or killed from the bomb were outside the school, and that there were Hamas terrorists who were shooting rockets from that exact place outside of the school, that Israel went and attacked the terrorists. Unfortunately, there were civilians who were in the area that Hamas was surrounding itself with that were injured and killed. One other big claim that is thrown out there is that Israel didn't let the media go in and see what was going on in Gaza. And again, this shows that Israel is such an oppressor. They blocked out free speech, free media. The truth is that many people believe this actually backfired on Israel, because since the international media couldn't go in, the images, the stories that came out of Gaza all came from Palestinians. And while many Palestinian civilians obviously might have had a different view, the fact is that Gaza is a totalitarian state. Hamas runs everything. They have complete control. People are afraid of Hamas. So all the images, all the pictures, all the video, all the stories that came out of Gaza came from Palestinian sources, which often and most times were completely biased. So why did Israel not let journalists in? For their own safety. Israel knew that it was going to have a difficult enough time trying to protect Palestinian civilians that it didn't want to have to worry about protecting international journalists as well. So they made the decision not to let journalists in. Some people saw it as a mistake. It certainly was not a sign of Israel trying to hide anything. In fact, the opposite. It might have caused Israel a lot of damage, because the only images that came out were from people who were not trying to give Israel's side of the story. I just want to end by throwing out there, when we hear on campus that people are going to be very upset about what happened in Gaza and how can people support what Israel did, we should realize that the Western world, almost in unison, those people in control and power, those people who understand what was happening in the area, stood up together with Israel and defended Israel's right to defend itself. President Barack Obama came out with a statement completely supporting Israel. I quote, President Obama said, "I think that no country would accept missiles landing on the heads of its citizens. If missiles were falling where my two daughters sleep, I would do everything in order to stop that." The Prime Minister of the Czech Republic, Jiří Potůček, who's also the European president, was quoted as saying, and I quote, "At this moment, from the perspective of the last days," this was during the Gaza initiative, "we understand that this step by Israel is defensive, not an offensive action." World leaders understood that Israel was defending itself, that it had a right to defend itself, it had a right to protect its civilians, and that it was doing everything it could to protect Palestinian civilians. So anyone on campus who's going to say, "You're crazy for defending Israel, how could you defend Israel from this massacre?" is completely twisting the facts. There was no massacre. The massacre was the Israelis who were targeted, killed, injured by rockets. Israel was trying to defend itself against Hamas. Unfortunately, Hamas hit amongst Palestinians, so many people were killed and injured, and leaders around the world and public opinion, certainly in North America, reflected that Israel had a right to defend itself and was doing the right thing. If anyone has any more questions about what happened in Gaza, how to talk about it, how to discuss it, or anything else doing with Israel Apartheid Week, please contact us at Hasbara Fellowships. You can go to our website, israelactivism.com. Please be in touch if there's anything we can do. Thank you.